all we were told was to squat down, your back to the blast, close your eyes, put your hands in front of your eyes. And then over the tannoy system, they came, they were saying, oh, now the aircraft is in the air, the Valiant is in the air, and they're coming to the drop zone. And they counted down 10, 9, all the way down to 1, and then 0. And all you heard was a thunder. I tell you then to be ready because the blast was coming. You had to crouch down, put your hands in front of your eyes closed, and when you see an X-ray, that's what we see. You see the bones of your hands. They were doing tests in Christmas Island, on Malden Island, and Maralinga, and Montebello, to find out the reaction of nuclear explosions on equipment and personnel. That is in documents released from Kew, written by very high-positioned personnel in the MOD.
The NPT regime has probably gone as far as it can in preventing proliferation. It now has more weaknesses than it has strengths. And what we need to do now is to build a world community dedicated to get rid of proliferation, but that also means to get rid of nuclear weapons, to pursue disarmament. That has to be done by NPT states and non-NPT states in partnership with civil society.
The wrong or the bad side of IAEA is that is always under pressure from the Western countries. But the pressure is put on IAEA for certain countries, but not all.
The UN Security Council has to be reformed. Its 5 permanent members on the Security Council are the 5 major nuclear weapon states. That cannot be right. Either we need to move to a situation where there are no permanent members of the Security Council, or we need to bring in non-nuclear weapon states, such as Brazil and South Africa, into the Security Council.
Every nation, actually, practically, believes that some form of change is required in the Security Council related to many problems that it has. Ultimately, the most important being that it does not reflect the world as it is today. It was created several years ago, many decades ago, and the world has changed significantly since 1945. And the present composition of the Security Council and its permanent members does not reflect how the world is going. So there's a very significant group of countries that is very actively engaged over the past decades, 20 years at least, in relation to this issue. And Brazil is certainly one of those that firmly believes that without adequate changes, the legitimacy of the Council is going to be called, the representation of the Council is not going to be adequate. Without adequate representation, it loses some of its legitimacy. Without its legitimacy, it loses efficacy.
Since the nuclear arms race began, over 2,000 nuclear weapons were detonated around the world. The blasts released radioactive poisons into the air, land and water. To this day, many who fell victim to nuclear tests have demanded compensation from their governments, but receive no support. The veterans continue to suffer from the radioactive blasts with long-term illness, which also passed on to their children.
We are all disgusted with this government, or not just the government, the MOD, because as I said, we've been going on about this since the 80s. And like, all governments turn around and tell us, yes, they will help us when they're in opposition. But once they're in government, they don't want to know. And the MOD have still got their heads in the sand. They deny everything. They deny that there was any risk at all, which is, to me, it's ludicrous, because they were warned about it before the tests were had even taken place. Because some of the high officers had told them, with the scientists, what they were going to test for. And they wanted to know the reaction of radiation personnel. I've got a bad blood disorder. And we discover now that my daughter's got a very similar thing. I've seen my colleagues that was on Christmas Island, their children and grandchildren are born deformed. So, you know, it is frightening. It frightens me to think what the future holds.
50 strategically placed nuclear bombs detonated simultaneously can destroy all life on the planet. The number of warheads in the world are far greater than this number. Together, North Korea, Pakistan, India, Israel, Britain, China, and France hold over 1,000 nuclear bombs. With the United States and Russia, the global nuclear stockpile amounts to over 11,000. The two countries hold 90% of the world's nuclear arsenal.
It is known that any use of nuclear weapons by a state is ultimately self-destructive. A nuclear attack by a state not only risks full-scale nuclear war, which would clearly have disastrous global consequences, but also endanger its own citizens, simply through the massive havoc that a nuclear bomb would create in the environment and the global economy.
Since the end of the war, the Americans have spent somewhere in the region of $8 trillion on nuclear weapons. Now, $8 trillion rolls off the tongue, but, you know, if you were to gather $100 bills and put them into a brick and then lay those bricks end to end, they would go round the world 180 times and create a wall that was more than 14 foot high around the equator. That's the sort of money that has been wasted by one country on these weapon systems that will never be used, let's hope.
It could be a blessing in disguise that nobody wishes to have a recession. Nobody wishes to wishes that his or her salary is cut. But because we are in a recession, because we need the money to fund our hospitals and education establishment and health services and Medicare and employment, we are short of jobs, this money could be utilized. And there is a possibility, a remote possibility, that this recession could work in favor of nuclear disarmament, that ultimately the governments of these worlds realize that this is ethically not right, it's morally not right, there is no worth in keeping nuclear weapons.
They are going ahead, spending all the time, spending a lot of money and renewing it and developing it further and further and further. It only signifies some kind of sickness. In the theory, in the argument, there is a kind of sickness. There is such a love for power race. The more I have, the more powerful I will be. And the more I can influence the rest of the world, that is the sickness.
The US allocated $185 billion to augment its nuclear stockpile over the next decade. Meanwhile, British politicians have plans on spending £76 billion to renew their Navy's Trident missiles.
This treaty will set the stage for further cuts. And going forward, we hope to pursue discussions.
Although the reduction treaty of the United States and Russia appears to show progress, the two countries are reducing their older, relatively weaker nuclear bombs, while building more powerful bombs at a faster rate.
All we have is rhetoric. We cannot let this situation continue, or there will be a use of nuclear weapons. Therefore, the leadership now has to be taken by the non-nuclear weapon countries who are in a majority. There are over 180 non-nuclear countries, some of which, like South Africa, gave up their nuclear weapons, whereas there are only 8 to 9 nuclear-armed states. The world's population requires that the non-nuclear countries stop begging the nuclear weapon states to do something and start taking responsibility to get that process underway themselves.
Many believe that this century is the century of dialogue and rationale, and those who possess nuclear weapons have wasted their money and resources, and moreover created a bigger danger to themselves.